Welcome back to part 2 of knowing the difference between the different types of midwives, obstetricians, and doulas. In part 1, we discussed all the definitions of the midwives, obstetricians, and doulas, which are super important. And in part 2, we're going to spotlight the different types of midwives, their education, their scopes of practice, and the confusion behind it. Okay? One of the challenges that midwives face is the name, the title, midwife, right? When I say the title midwife, even right now, there's a part of you that's wondering, well, what type of midwife are you? What do you do? Do you work at home? Do you work at the hospital? Right? That's part of the confusion. So for example, if I were to introduce myself and say, hey, I'm Maria. I'm a labor and delivery nurse, which I'm not. You would say, oh, and you would know exactly what I do. Just like if I said, hey, I'm Maria. I'm a neonatologist. Also, you would know exactly what I do. You might have some questions about my practice, but my title clearly defines who I am and what I do. Now, midwives, that's not the case for us. So I want to start to break down the different types of midwives for you and the training. And I do want to say that I'm going to present it, like I'm going to talk about the first style and then the next one and then the next one. Just because I start with one and end with one doesn't mean that they're the first and then they're the last. This is not a hierarchy, right? Each type of midwife has their own specific role that's in the birth community that is essential and cannot be replaced by the other. For example, I'm going to start with certified nurse midwives. They have the most education and they work in the hospital. And so from an outward perspective, they may appear to be more professional or more legitimate. See, that is a value judgment that's misplaced. And I want to remind you that each type of midwife fills a role because our job is to be with women. And women across our beautiful planet have very specific needs. And each type of midwife can fulfill those needs. So let's get started in talking about the types of midwives. So certified nurse midwives, they have a college education, and then they have a master's degree in midwifery. They primarily work in the hospitals, they run birth centers, and some of them work at home. They work in collaboration, and really they work under the supervision of an obstetrician. They have the rights and the privileges to write prescriptions, order ultrasounds, make management decisions, and they can really take control or manage a client from conception through postpartum. However, they typically work in the hospital, and so they work within the protocols of the hospital. And so they don't have special time frames or special magic midwife wand that makes you have a different birth than a hospital birth. Midwives specialize in healthy, low-risk women, and if a client in the certified nurse midwife practice becomes high risk, then she just transfers her to her collaborating physician. Okay. Now this next group of midwives, they're called direct entry midwives. And there's a couple different groups that fall under the title direct entry. They're called direct entry because unlike the certified nurse midwife that went to the university for several years before she practiced midwifery, direct entry, their education paths, they were immediately immersed in the midwifery world. They were directly immersed. So the first one I want to talk about is a certified professional midwife, and they're called CPM. And they are certified by the North American Registry of Midwives. And that certification is a national certification and an international certification. They attend birth center births and home births. They are experts in normal, healthy, low-risk women, and they are not able to write the prescriptions. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some scope of practice for the licensed midwives because they overlap, right? But think of certified professional midwives as experts in birth centers and home births, right? They specialize in natural births, and if something becomes high risk, then they transfer to the hospital, and they do not typically have a collaborative practice with the physician, right? You get whoever is on call when you arrive. And then you have the licensed midwives. So in Arkansas, a licensed midwife has the same scope of practice as a certified professional midwife. That's because in Arkansas, we adopted our protocol for licensure, our standard for licensure is the standard to be a CPM. We just said whatever is good enough for the CPM, that's good enough for our state. And so that's how you're going to become a state licensed midwife, is you're going to meet that standard. So the path to a midwife, to a certified professional midwife, their education is really different. So some of them could have gone to an academic program that had a companion apprenticeship program that was together. Some of them had an online education and then primarily apprentice trained, and then others were completely apprentice trained. How they started their journey to midwifery is not that important. It's not that it's not that important, but all these different paths to midwifery ultimately go and funnel into being able to pass the test, right? The test, you have to show your skills, you have to prove your number of births, and then you have to pass the test, which is a rigorous 8-hour written exam. All those paths can lead you to successfully completing that test, right? And now a licensed midwife has those same types of training. Either they went to a physical brick and mortar school, or online training, or apprentice trained. Their apprenticeship for these licensed midwives is primarily how they get their experience, right? Licensed midwives, the clients that come to licensed midwives, they're choosing home births. And currently, we say we have birth centers, but they're primarily home births that are in a midwife's home. Like she converts her home to a birth center, but it's not like a freestanding birth center that's attached to a hospital. It's just like a home birth, just in somebody else's house. And they're set up for the birth, right? And so that's what a licensed midwife home birth center would look like. Licensed midwives need risk assessments for each one of their clients. So each client that comes to them needs to be evaluated by a person that has no financial bias whatsoever to determine if this client is healthy, low risk, and is a good candidate for home birth. So that's called a risk assessment. So that's when they do their health history, they do their labs, they do their ultrasounds. So a licensed midwife or a CPM, at least in the state of Arkansas, cannot provide those things. We need to refer to a certified nurse midwife or an obstetrician or a health department clinician. So a certified nurse midwife has a larger scope of practice than a certified professional midwife or a licensed midwife. In Arkansas, there are a few things I want to say about Arkansas. Even though our standard is to be a certified professional midwife, which is a national and international certification, we have to say that we are licensed lay midwives. So instead of writing LM, we write LLM. That very definition makes no sense. You cannot be a lay person and be licensed and certified in that same profession at the same time. Another just interesting fact about Arkansas is that as of this recording, there are currently no Black midwives, no Latina midwives. As far as I know, there are no Native American midwives or Asian midwives. None of them working in the hospital, birth centers, or at home. There are, however, a few like hungry and excited apprentices that are really committed to the path of midwifery. And so I'm excited to see what the future of midwifery holds in Arkansas. But Arkansas is a state that's legal. And so we're about to segue into unlicensed midwives, right? Or lay midwives. Part of the crux of the problem with midwifery is legality, right? Not every state is legal to practice midwifery. Some states are straight up illegal and some are illegal. Illegal states are gray states. And in those states, that means that it is unlawful for a trained, skilled birth attendant to advertise herself as a midwife, and it is unlawful for her to receive payment. I want to clarify a few things. When you're thinking about legality in birth, you as the client, you have the right to give birth in any setting. You can give birth at home. The legality has nothing to do with you. It only has to do with the care provider and with the midwife. Another thing I want to say is you have to pay your midwife, even if she can't legally say, this is my fee. You have to pay her a reasonable fee, just like you would pay any licensed professional. You give it to her via a donation or via a gift. By not paying your midwife, that is so disrespectful and hurtful to our profession, and she's doing you a huge favor, way more favor to you than you are to her. So keep that in mind when you hear it. You don't have to pay her. Because that's the sad truth, is a lot of times they get burned. Unlicensed midwives is this huge category that I'm about to enter into, and I'm realizing I'm about to enter into a delicate terrain that I want to navigate with respect, because it is a vast, vast group of people that you cannot pinpoint and put into a box, right? A huge reason that there are unlicensed midwives is because they simply live and work in a state that doesn't legally recognize them. They are certified professional midwives. They have an education, they have the skills, they have the experience. They're just not recognized by their state. So that's a huge group. Then there's a whole other group of women. They're not licensed because maybe they lost their license. There's a whole other group that are unlicensed midwives because they work for God and they don't work for the system. They don't want to be put into a box, and they don't want to work for the state and the law. They have a sense of calling to the birth community and to the birth world. Okay? And so when you're thinking about that group of people, it's delicate balance, because if you're working not in a system, then that means you may or may not have protocols of practice. And those protocols of practice are seen as a container of safety, or seen as a reliable set of rules and standards in which to function. And if those are missing, it can appear to be lack of professionalism or lack of integrity, right? And so there's this huge variation of midwives in this group. And yet there is a depth to their skills and to their expertise and to their value that's irreplaceable. Okay? And I'm bringing this up because when you compare certified nurse midwives, certified professional midwives, licensed midwives, they all have a very clear, clean scope of practice that they work with healthy, low-risk women. And they have a system in place that if a woman, or when a woman that is healthy, low risk, and as her pregnancy or birth unfolds, if she becomes high risk, there's a system in place for her to be transferred or transported to the next level of care that's fairly smooth, right? And is respectable and is well paved and it's safe and gentle. Whereas also within this parameter, the scope of practice, healthy low-risk women means that these midwives that I just said are not managing twins, breaches, VBACs, high blood pressure, gestational diabetes, post-dates, all these things, history of multiple births or history of hemorrhage, right? So they're not dealing with this high-risk group because it's beyond their scope. It's beyond their protocol. Whereas when you have a group of unlicensed midwives that have potentially no scope or are unsure of their scope and protocol, then two things happen. When they're managing a birth and they're attending a birth, that when a woman goes from low risk to high risk, either they're going to stay at home for a long period of time and hope that things resolve, because sometimes they do. Sometimes you think something's about to be really bad and then ultimately it works out okay. And so it's okay to stay. And then other times you wait until the last minute to transport, because you know that when you transport, you're taking a woman to a hostile environment. And then oftentimes the midwife can't go with her to the hospital, so she drops her off. And when she drops her off at the hospital, a woman appears as if she's had no prenatal care. And the hospital is not prepared, and they have a huge complication that they suddenly have to deal with without any history or any support or any story. And then that woman receives a level of care that sometimes is inappropriate, like they're going to save the baby, or they're going to keep the baby in the NICU for longer, or they're going to call DHS, or they're going to drug test them, or they're going to do stuff, right? That was all unnecessary. The reason that midwife doesn't walk in is because she's going to be chastised, and also because we're talking about illegal states and illegal states, right? So what happens when you have a beautiful birth with an unlicensed midwife in one of those states and everything goes great? Great. End of story. But if you have a fetal demise or you have a complication like I just described, that midwife is at risk for having her door kicked in and to being handcuffed and be arrested for a felony for practicing medicine without a license. So of course she's not going to walk into that hospital, right? She's at risk. And so even though these midwives have such skills and so much value to offer, they're shrouded with uncertainty and judgment and danger, right? The other thing that I want to say about unlicensed midwives is just in like the controversy of it, right? And I'm not talking about judgment here, I'm just like revealing the controversy of how important this is that if these certified nurse midwives, licensed midwives, certified professional midwives, they have this scope of practice that they're working with healthy, low-risk women, then the unlicensed midwives don't have that scope of practice. They're also working with the highest risk groups, potentially. So, for example, twins, breaches, VBACs, those are all considered high risk, right? Yes, twins and breaches need an extra level of experience, an extra set of hands. And if these super educated midwives are unable, and not only are they super educated, but they're resourced. They have physicians, they have hospitals, they have a safety net, right? So these educated resource midwives are unable to attend these births, then they're not getting the experience. So then these births do seem so much higher risk, and then they're not able to attend them. Then that means the unlicensed midwives attend them, right? And they're the ones with the least resource, safety network, and potential education. The other challenge is VBAC, right? VBAC, from my perspective, is not nearly as high risk as twins and breaches. However, there are so many more VBACs than there are twins and breaches. Why is that? So, for example, I can only talk about my state. My state, Arkansas, has a cesarean section rate as of 2019 of 27.7%. Okay, when you think about the World Health Organization says that worldwide the cesarean section rate should be 10%. So we're talking about countries with no running water. You got to walk to the doctor, war-torn, first world nations. All the world should be 10%. And then for some reason in Arkansas, we have 27.7%. So that means there are a lot of women, lots and lots and lots of women that are being railroaded into unnecessary cesarean births for situations like failure to progress. And so then 1, 2, 3, 4 years later, when that woman is pregnant again and she's realizing that her birth didn't go the way she wanted it to, and now she wants to own her body and own her birth, and she wants to have a healing experience, and she wants to have a different experience, she wants to have a biological birth, she can't do that at home with a certified professional midwife. She can't do that at the birth center with the certified nurse midwife, or even in the hospital with her. In the hospitals in Arkansas, some will do VBACs, but not all. And so what is this woman going to do? Of course she's going to have a home birth with an unlicensed midwife. Obviously she is. That's her choice. That's her option. She's kind of pushed against the wall. And so this problem isn't always with the unlicensed midwives. The problem is with the system. The system is broken. We have a system that denies the right for women to practice their profession of midwifery in all 50 states. We have a system that railroads women into these over-medicalized births that are leading to surgeries, and then we deny them their ability to have a safe home birth. The system needs to be fixed. We don't need to punish the midwives. So, I just want to say thank you, actually. I want to say thank you to all you unlicensed midwives out there that are showing up again and again, despite all the dangers, despite the risk, and you are helping women give birth safely at home with dignity and respect, even though you are at risk for a felony. And I'm grateful for your courage and your bravery and your commitment to birth and to women. I truly am. But in order to change the culture of birth, we have to fix the broken system. So, what's the answer? We have to legalize midwifery in all 50 states. We need to lift the VBAC ban on home births. We really, at the very least, we need to stop doing so many obstetrical interventions that are leading these women to surgery, right? We need to train more midwives, right? And we need to make bold and brave birth decisions. You as the pregnant woman, this is your opportunity to be a part of something that's bigger and better than you. This is your opportunity to find the type of birth that's meaningful to you, to be in alignment with your heart and with your core values about birth, and in alignment with the type of birth that you want for your baby and that your baby wants to be born in, right? And that takes courage. And that takes ownership and sovereignty in your voice and in your body and in your wisdom. Okay? So I know you're watching this video because you're like, oh my gosh, I'm pregnant. And I'm trying to determine, like, I want to know about midwives. I want to know about doulas. I want to know who I should hire. I want to know where should I give birth. I want some information so I can make some wise decisions, right? And I want to support you with that, right? And the way to support you with that is you're going to have to make some consultations with people, with midwives, right? And in order to be clear, you have to know what the right questions are, the right questions to ask yourself about your core values of birth, what type of birth you really want, to get real with yourself. And then you have to know the practical questions to be asking your care provider. And so I created a whole video about how to hire the right midwife for you, and that's linked below. And then also knowing the right questions to ask your care provider. I'm going back to that because it's so critical in terms of you making informed, empowered decisions. And so I created a link down below also for a download of 50 questions to ask your potential midwife or obstetrician, and then 25 questions to ask your doula. And if you're sitting on the fence and wondering, like, okay, well, I'm hearing all this information about midwives, and I'm wondering if home birth is the right choice for me, I made a video about why I think if you're wanting a natural birth, if you're wanting a biological birth, and you're healthy and low risk, why home is the safest, best place. And so that is my opinion, and there's a video for you in there. And I want to go back to this beautiful dichotomy and paradox of, yes, here you are, you're pregnant and you're making decisions for yourself and for your body and for your baby. And at the same time, you're a part of the big picture. And your choices not only influence you, but they influence the rest of us, because we are a collective, right? We're a collective of women. We're a collective of mothers, of daughters, of sisters, of grandmothers, of brothers, of fathers, right? Of doctors, of midwives, of doulas. We're all in this together, and all of our decisions and all the ways that we show up have a ripple out effect, and it can change the culture of birth and can improve things, right? Because who you hire to help you give birth is so important. It's the difference maker of you having a birth that you feel was empowered and you felt informed, and you felt, no matter how it plays out, you felt a sense of ownership and pride and understanding of it, versus it being railroaded. Because if you don't step up and take ownership, it more than likely will get railroaded away. And after you've listened to this talk about part one, about the definitions of midwives and doulas and obstetricians, and then now you start to hear the nuances and complexities of the types of midwives, and then you might be like, shoot, I heard all that, but I still feel pretty confident that I'm not going to hire an unlicensed midwife. But then you don't stand in sovereignty now, the chance of you having a C-section gets higher and higher, right? And then a couple years from now, you might be looking for that phone number. Or you might do something crazy like move to Chicago or Boston or any other city in a state that midwifery is illegal or illegal. And then what are you going to do? Right? And so I'm just saying that because it's real. And I care about you, and I want the best for you, and I want you to have a birth that you feel really good about, that you feel safe about, and you feel empowered by. So, I'm going to wrap this video up. Let me know in the comments what you learned, what you think about midwifery being illegal in 50 states, in certain states, excuse me, and what you think about your birth and how you're going to take ownership for your birth. And don't forget, you have a bunch of resources below. And I'll see you in the next video. Until next time, my friends, breathe deep and always walk in beauty.